Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tom Parker Bowles, Elizabeth Sorensen, and your moderator, Tara Lazar.
I don't know why I'm in the middle.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm actually the moderator. um, so I'm so glad to be here with you guys and to talk about my favorite subject, which is food. And I thought we would start off with your thoughts on the chef Paul Bocuse, who, I don't know, had a 3 Michelin star restaurant since 1965, and who was named in the Michelin Guide the kind of chef of the century. And I'd love to know your thoughts on, I mean, obviously this is, classic French cooking, Michelin Guide approved. Is excellent food kind of, did they need to have that stamp today? Or can you have different, has that changed? Do you need to be classic food? Do you need to have a Michelin star, or has that kind of shifted a little bit?
Well, Michelin's basically, the Michelin Guide started obviously as a way of flogging tyres. If you forget that, but if you look, French cuisine was always, excuse me, knocking out. French cuisine was always seen as the grandest of all the cuisines. It was haute cuisine. It was the food of royalty, of the aristocracy. Still in the UK, state dinners and state banquets, the menus were in French because this was seen as the grandest and the most civilized. But over the years, Michelin, a Michelin star. If I went to Italy and saw a restaurant with a Michelin star, I'd avoid it like the plague. There are certain foods I don't want mucked around food. And going back to Bocuse, Bocuse was a hugely important figure because him, along with the Trois brothers, Roger Verger, a whole group of chefs in the 60s and 70s came up with, were part of the movement of Nouvelle Cuisine. Now, Nouvelle Cuisine has become a sort of swear word, involving bits of kiwi fruit and strange-shaped plates and weird portions. But actually what it was the most revolutionary thing. It took the heavy sauces, it was talking about freshness, it lightened the sauces, it changed the face of French cooking from that very, very heavy flour and fat-based, lots of sauces, ingredients, tons of heavy, the sort of escoffier sort of food, and it changed it into much lighter, much more seasonal, the way we eat now. So I'm wibbling around about Michelin, but Michelin is not as important as it used to be. Certainly in the UK, France is losing its culinary ascendancy. Spain is, with all the sort of El Bullis and all that sort of stuff, it's a time of great change at the higher ends of cooking, and Michelin isn't as important as it once was, I don't think.
I would probably take the opposite stance of, I think Michelin used to be very important, and then it almost didn't become so important because everyone was cooking, especially in California, where I've always been from. I think that people started cooking simpler, and everyone became a cook. Everyone was their own chef. People were opening restaurants based on any kind of food. And then I think San Francisco, maybe about 10 years ago, started awarding Michelin stars just on food, because in the past, Michelin had to have certain silverware and certain crystal and certain service, and then they gave it to this restaurant that was a low-key restaurant, neighborhood restaurant called Range, and it was like, little basic tables. The servers were in T-shirts. The food was very good, but I think everyone had to rethink what Michelin was. And then I think it's actually starting to now award people who really take the time to do technique like they used to. They kind of abandoned it, maybe even in San Francisco for the last 10 years. You look at Alice Waters, who makes beautiful food, but even her cookbook is, you take some plums and you put a little vinegar on it and a little olive oil, and that's the dish. There's not a lot of technique to it. So I would agree with you about Italy, however. I'd never go into a Michelin star restaurant. But I do think that when I go to a new town as a restaurateur, I think the awards are going to people who are talented and do technique, not who are just doing good food.
Okay, so what meant excellent 40 years ago has changed? And do you think a street stall could have on par with the best restaurant in London? I mean, can there be that much change, if that makes sense?
again, in London, in the UK, you're finding exactly as you were saying, is that the tablecloths are going. You don't have to dress up. A lot of restaurants in France and in the UK 20 years ago were like mausoleums. My wife used to call them clink clink restaurants because people were too scared to say anything. They felt, they were these sort of waistcoated and dinner jacketed waiters, quite snooty, and a sommelier, and these big thick wine lists and thick cutlery, and it was all designed. It was all sort of. It wasn't about the enjoyment of food. It was more about this sort of formal theatre. And you look at, especially chefs like Jason Atherton or all sorts, Heston Blumenthal, all these guys in the UK and women are stripping away the formalities, stripping away this idea that you should be privileged, that you should be bowing down in these sort of cold, passionless places, and it's about the food, and this is what matters. Is there are places getting 2 or 3 Michelin stars that don't necessarily involve the heavy cutlery and the crystal and the 400 front of house. We're moving away from formality, and this is a good thing. So you can still praise the technique, you can still praise the ingredients and the chef, but you don't have to sit in silence in these boring, cold restaurants, eating course after course of overwrought, overmucked around food that is all about what it seems rather than what it tastes like. So going back to street food, I'd rather eat street food, good Mexican street food, good Thai street food, good Chinese street food, than I would go to half the Michelin restaurants in the world. Street food is the pulsing heart of any culinary culture, I think, and I love it. But it's different from Michelin food. So.
It's interesting you say that. We just went to the Fat Duck and Heston's restaurant, and the decor there was no decor.
No,
it was the ugliest restaurant I've ever been to.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying. Okay, so I just wanted to introduce you guys because I didn't do that. But Tom Parker Bowles, food critic, TV presenter, writer of books about food. Also, Fortnum and Mason hired you to write their kind of seminal
first cookbook for 330 years,
in 330 years. Tara Lazar, food extraordinaire, who came back to her hometown of the desert and has really changed the food scene here with a few restaurants. And well done.
Thank you.
I imagine that wasn't always easy. So I wanted to ask you guys your food journey. I don't know. Tell me about your life through food. Beginning, middle, and end.
Well, I had parents who would stop at every roadside stand in any country to eat, let alone also we had incredible range. I tell this story a bit, but when we were in Japan, my dad told the taxi driver to follow the truck drivers because where they stop to eat noodles is the best place to eat noodles. It must have been probably 6 or 8, and when we went in the taxi, we couldn't get the noodles because the noodle stands are really high because they cater only to the truck drivers that eat right in their cars, so we had to get out and reach for our bowl and then put it in the taxi. And my dad, had the fortune of eating at Mr. Bocuse's restaurant, and so we had a great amount of range. I think the word foodie is unfortunately a little abused, but I think anyone can eat at a nice restaurant, but I think that the ability to know street food and the ability to enjoy a dive and know how to order and how to order multiple plates, that's my food journey.
Mine was, I come from a greedy family, I'm greedy. You've got to talking about great writers and especially great American food writers. You think of MFK Fisher, obviously, who's a beautiful prose stylist, but my favorite of all is a guy called Calvin Trillin, New Yorker writer, still a poet, absolutely brilliant, and he wrote 3 books called the Tummy Trilogy, which in the 70s, for me, looking back on it, it was a movement against, as he calls it, Casa de la House of the Casa, of the posh, overraw, oversauced sort of restaurants, and going to Stone Crabs and going to find the best, pastrami, or it was all about celebrating, all the great regional American food that wasn't high end, and it was fried chicken, and it was barbecue, and it was Arthur Bryant's, and that he speaks to me because he's not only a beautiful writer, but he celebrates the down and dirty, not necessarily always dirty, but the food, like you were talking about the noodle stores. When you go to Japan, I want to go to the ramen places. Yes, you want to go to the 3-star, whatever that thing is, Hero Dreams of Sushi, which is fantastic, but really, you want to find. I grew up in England, and England has a very bad reputation as a food country, that's unfair, I think, because English food is about very good ingredients, very seasonal ingredients with very little done to them: asparagus, gulls' eggs, salmon, whatever it is. It's intense, and of course, it doesn't travel well. You don't see English restaurants across the world like you see Chinese or Indian. But it does have I grew up on a farm, so you knew where everything came from: the chicken, the cows, the eggs, and you lived in through all the seasons. Because in the 70s, I don't think we had a supermarket. It was a big thing when Sainsbury's, the supermarket, came. So you knew that asparagus would come, end of spring, and that the game would come in August, September. So we were just all really greedy, and we all loved food, and we all talked about food. And my mum was a good cook, my father was a good gardener. So we grew up with a very healthy love of food. But age 8, I was sent off to boarding school. Very English thing to do. And the food was absolutely disgusting. I mean, it was offensively bad, and I just couldn't believe it. At age 8, I didn't mind all the leaving your parents or the rest of it, the cold showers. Whereas my friend Seth, he was there as well. But this food was just everything that's bad about British food: institutional, grey, gristly, everything. There was no care, there was no love. It was just, it hadn't changed much since the workhouses of Victorian days. It really was. And that turned a healthy appetite into a total all-encompassing greed. I was appalled at how bad this food was. You go back home and eat good food, then back to school again. And I was always hungry, not proper hunger, but so if I can thank that prep school for anything, I can thank you for pushing me into food writing, because it was really, really, really awful. I mean, eggs that tasted, in those days, eggs that tasted sort of like hockey pucks, fried eggs, covered in grease that tasted of fish, and bacon with that scum all over it, and really undercooked. And on Sundays, like the roast, which is a great thing, you get a good bit of meat and roast it. It was just sliced, processed meat. It was mince. Everything was mince with a sort of gristly, grey, chewy, and bits, and potatoes with black bits in it. And I find it really offensive, and that's why English food has such a bad reputation, I think. It's the institutional, because the Victorians came along and said it wasn't very good to indulge in your passions and the stuff you love. So, of course, it became food as function rather than food as pleasure. And, people talk about Britain becoming a food nation. It's not a food nation at all. Great Angela Hartnett, who's a great chef in the UK, said, look, it's not, there are two levels. There are the so-called foodies, which is an expression that can be overused, and talk about their heritage and their free range and their, kombucha. But the vast majority of people in England still eat very badly, junk food, cheap food. And it's not me wagging my finger from an ivory tower saying you should eat organic chicken, you should, but we lost our food culture many years ago in the UK, unlike China or India or France or Italy, where there's an understanding that good ingredients cost more. We don't have that. We've lost that years ago. So there's no revolution in the
I was about to ask that. I mean, I guess as a foreigner coming to England, I would attribute, the food that I experienced 20 years ago to now, I would say, there's no food revolution in England. That's so interesting, because as a foreigner,
Well, in London, see, that's
so
different.
in London,
See,
okay.
London is, and I'm a restaurant critic, so I get tons of crap from my readers. I can say crap, can't I? Yeah, from my readers saying, you don't go around the country anymore. And I do. I try and go all the way around the country. But London is still, it's a tiny island, Britain. We still think we're much bigger than we are, but we're tiny. And London is a centre. And London, because it lacked a strong food culture of its own, opened up its arms. And London is a great city built on immigration. Everything great about London's immigration. It's wave after wave after wave. Ever since the Romans found a nice bend on the river and thought, this will make a nice place to build a garrison, and it built and built and built. This is what it is. So we embrace, you can eat every food culture under the sun pretty much in London, and it's great moving between areas where you're down the Edgware Road and it's very sort of Arab, and then you can move across to South Kensington, which is French, go down to sort of Peckham, which is Nigerian. You get all these cultures and you can get a taste, and what we lack was our own food culture, which was, we used to have it, but we just don't have it anymore. But yeah, so London's a great restaurant city, but perhaps not still British food.
So you wouldn't consider Spotted Dick or
Bubble
and Squeak to be, what's with the names too? I don't understand that. Is it, because these are so beloved by adults, British adults, and they love these
it's
kind of...
nursery food and comfort food. It's Spotted Dick, and people talk about fish and chips and roast beef and
Bangers and mash.
bangers and mash, you know, but a good sausage is a fantastic thing, as any culture which eats meat would tell you. Doesn't matter whether you're in Thailand with your Issan sausage or whether you're in, you know, Italy with your whatever. It's good sausages are great things, but the British are great traditionally at roasts and puddings. Are quite heavy, stodgy food, but yeah, they do have silly names, lots of silly names. I suppose it's part of a language that yeah, I don't know why they got silly names. We take it for granted, but yeah, everyone comes and goes to Wilton's or to Rules or to Greens. Greens, sadly, is there's a whole different story that it had to my uncle. It's my uncle's restaurant, but it's been Crown Estates had to close it down, and it just anyway. That's a whole different story. I can bore you with later. But yes, it's going to be resurrected soon. We're on it. But good oysters. We have wonderful oysters and wonderful crab and lobster and all these raw ingredients. But it's yeah, that's good British food we're onto there. But London, as I said, is an international city, and this is why when you come to here, or you know, last night we were in your steakhouse, we craved good steak. We said, "Where's the best steakhouse in town?" Bang to Mr. Lyons, and it was perfect, absolutely wonderful.
Okay, so speaking to that, and I'd actually like to hear from both of you, but you know, food revolution. I mean, this place. I grew up. You know, I spent part of my life here in the desert, and I mean. Food was, I mean, you know, going out for a good meal was definitely not part of the game plan when we would stay here. Maybe once in a blue moon we'd go out to some really stuffy French restaurant, or Taco Bell, you know. And you grew up here and then you left and you came back. How has food changed here in the past decade? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Or how has it changed since
I'm asked
you
this
grew
a
up?
lot, and you know, I can't give you one definitive answer. I think we make food that we want to eat, and I think we go elsewhere and become inspired and get to bring it back. I think one of the things that was sorely missing from the desert was buying local. You know, we're in this like massive agricultural belt. I don't know if the audience knows, but you know, we export some of Japan's finest eggplants, peppers, grapes. They come from this desert, and you know, it's such a shock that they're all, you know, being trucked out of here daily, and they're not stopping at any of the restaurants. So when I opened Cheeky's 10 years ago now, that's the first thing I did. Is I went to go meet farmers, and I said, "What do you grow, and how can we get it into our restaurants?" And obviously, it's very tedious because there were many days that our chicken farmers said, "We're just not going to deliver today because our truck broke down." And, you know, we don't have eggs for a breakfast restaurant. That's kind of crazy. But I think that was the ethos of how we started. And then bringing different little flavors. We have a menu that changes every week. So you have whim and whimsy, and if something doesn't work, you can take it off. You know, we print on these paper menus, which is so nice. You go, anytime you see a restaurant that has a laminated menu, you know that they're not changing their menu that often because it's too expensive. So little things like that. And then, you know, we just kind of, Palm Springs is a little different than down desert. I think people eat a little later. They share food, bigger groups go out to eat. So we just started creating menus that catered to that kind of lifestyle. You know, you're at the pool all day. You don't want to go to eat dinner at 5. You have a cocktail. You take your time. You want a 2.5-hour dinner. So that was kind of the foundation. We just built around that.
And how hard is it to buy local?
It's really hard. You know, we're very sensitive to seasons. We when it's really cold here or it's really hot here, the plants obviously get very affected. And it's trying to get it to us in a time that we need it for a restaurant. You know, it's not hard to go to the farmers markets because you can adapt and change. So you have to have an open-minded and a lot of flexibility when dealing with the farmers. But obviously not impossible. There's 6 or 7 of us. I think down here you see it on the email list when they send out. So they typically send a farmer's report out a couple days ahead of time, and you see who's on it, so you know who really is buying local.
And
what about it? It still is. It's a different kind of menu, but we still are very seasonal, and we still buy all of our produce locally. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
I guess this would go to both of you. I throw it out is the idea of heritage. How important is heritage? I mean, I feel like I'm asking you about a country and I'm asking you about a smaller place, but how important is heritage? What would you consider to be the most beautiful example of, I mean, I guess SoCal and British cuisine? Are there new takes on it, or is that tradition? Is it important to keep that tradition kind of respective of its heritage?
I mean, when you describe tomatoes as heritage tomatoes, it always annoys me because, it's great that all these new old strains are being brought back and rare breeds. That's all fantastic. People on menus can overwrite menus too much. I like those very simple menus that just describe what you're eating rather than a long pane of, purple prose, saying that how the eggs were collected and all the rest of it. But British food, there's modern British food. There's a chef called Fergus Henderson. He does a restaurant called St John, and it's no-satel eating. Now, no-satel eating is what everyone did, in the old days before refrigeration and unseasonal food. You ate everything because that's what you did, and you would eat offal and you would eat, everything. You wouldn't waste, and I think it's very important, certainly as chefs, restaurateurs, food writers, this idea of wasting food. We waste a huge amount of food. Supermarkets, go out of their way to make us buy 3 for the price of 2. Food you don't need. In the UK, it's something ridiculous, like 55% of all food is wasted. It's disgusting, really, the amount. So, for me, the new movement in Britain is not a new movement at all. It's what chefs and cooks have always done, is make the best use. If you're eating an animal, out of respect, you want to use every single bit. And offal, in the UK, people like chicken breast, and they like fillet steak, and they like all the boring stuff. The shin of beef and the liver and the kidneys and the tripe and the brain and all that. That for me is the exciting stuff. You have to know how to cook it, but it's very important if I'm an amateur cook at home. But all those slightly dodgy offcuts that people don't like. That's where the interest is, especially on an animal. That's what's done all the work, the shin and the breast, and slow cooking and braising, and that's where you get the flavour. And still, the British offal, they say it is. Whereas offal is to be absolutely adored. Brains fried, fried in black butter, or kidneys, our devil kidneys. And whether you're in Chengdu or whether you're in Cheltenham or whether you're in, California, it's about using everything and not wasting food. And I think that's a movement that is happening a lot in the UK now, which is an important one, I think.
I agree entirely. I know Americans are very strange about things like fish heads. You talk to any Asian and they would never buy a fish if there wasn't the head attached, But I think we're getting better. My favorite thing is oxtail. My mom used to always cook oxtail, and my brother would always joke, every time I bring a date home, why does there have to be oxtail on the table? But she was, proud of her best dish. So I would say that heritage is really important, though. I think it's important to cook and eat what's in our nearby neighborhoods. I think there's something about our bodies that are used to eating what's in season, not what's forced to be in season, and it has to travel 1 million miles to get here. And I think it's important we, eat the things as they are now. And yeah, that's very important. Sorry, I keep saying the same thing.
And they're at their best, aren't they? So when the seasons, again, the season, it's so different. The desert seasons in California, actually, you have things all the time here, don't you? Whereas, but you look forward to grouse or asparagus or whatever because they only come for a short time, but they're at their very best. Why? Take asparagus. I bang on about, but they're imported all the year round. You can get Peruvian, but the moment you cut an asparagus, all that sugar, that sweetness starts turning to starch within minutes, really. So by the time it's been, sort of chilled, transported across the world, by the time it gets to you, it's a shadow of its former self. Yet, if you're buying it from your local market, which has been cut that morning, and you're eating it in season, it's not just ticking a box saying we're seasonal, aren't we clever? No, ingredients are at their very best when they're local and they're seasonal. So as a cook and an eater, that's why I like them, because it makes sense. It's just eating things at their best when they're supposed to be eaten is great.
And celebrating them. You know, the asparagus, I've gone to the asparagus festival in
Hay on
in
Wye, was it?
England.
Yeah.
I can't remember the city, but you know, that's so fun to have a festival just based on, you know, one particular food. But it just goes to show how it should be celebrated. You know, every season should have its own foods and vegetables, and we eat them in the season. And we serve blueberry pancakes at Cheeky's, and it always kills me in the winter when we're, you know, we try to not bring anything in from Chile or Israel, but we can't have a breakfast restaurant without blueberry pancakes. Someone's like, ugh. You see like big made in Chile, and you're like, God, you had to travel so far to get here. But
So
yeah.
far. So I want to go back to something Tom said, which I mean, and you guys can either say that's above my pay grade or, you know, go for it. But I mean, America has such amazing food, and yet a huge amount of the population eats so badly. Britain, I mean, London has great food, but you said there is no food revolution. There, I mean, people eat, and I know what you're talking about. I mean, tin canned foods is absolutely, it's fine, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Or junk food. In the UK,
Or junk food.
kids
So,
just living on junk food, which is...
so what's to be done? Can things be done? I mean, or is this?
I mean, it's a big and difficult question.
It is.
You look at traditional food cultures, where it's very strong, the food cultures, and you go back again and again to India, China, France, Italy, but as we speak, as the 21st century moves on, it's being eroded, these classic foodways, these classic food cultures, as fast food comes in, as globalization, as children aren't interested in, you know, staying in the kitchen and cooking, you know, these elaborate dishes, whether it's, I don't know, mole or whatever it is. You know, they want instant gratification, and it's advertised and it's marketed as seen, you know, as much more fun than boring old traditional food. So you do ironically see these great food cultures being eroded by more and more fast food, international fast food. And listen, I love a McDonald's cheeseburger. In and out is not fast food, obviously, that's something way above. But, you know, as much as anyone else, you can't be a
Way
food
above.
snob, obviously. But it is ironic, I think, and you see it in Japan to an extent, China, these sort of international brands coming in, and what it's doing is slowly eroding the tradition of home cooking. Now, home cooking is the backbone of any food culture. You know, home cooking is where it all happens, and as more and more people, especially as more and more women, quite rightly go out to work and do their own thing, there's a danger of these food cultures being lost as it goes on, and people think, oh, it's boring. And these kids, you know, my kids, lots of kids, this idea that you don't have to, you know, I want to be a chef, I want to be famous like Gordon Ramsay. Well, you know, Gordon worked his arse off for 25 years, you know, of the most unsociable chef hours, and it's not sexy, and it's hot, and it's fat spits everywhere, and it can be aggressive, and they just think that you get there without working. And fast food always reminds me of that. It's instant gratification. There's no depth to it, and it is in danger. You know, is fast food taking over the world? Possibly, you know, but I don't know. You look at books like Fast Food Nation. You look at all the people who are going against fast food, but it's, you know, the sort of locavores, and it's still a very small niche thing in America and the UK, and in cultures where, you know, China, you still find, you know, people will queue up for the best noodle stall, people will queue up for the ramen or whatever it is. So there is hope. I don't think it's all destroyed, but we're living in a culture now that is becoming more and more homogenized, more global. Everyone's eating the same thing and doing the same thing, which is a worry, because if we lose our home cooking and the tradition of home cooking in any culture, that's the end of food culture, as far as I'm concerned.
It's a sad subject. I think I'm hoping that as we get smarter about nutrition and more in tune with what makes us feel good and what doesn't make us feel good, I'm very optimistic that we'll start actually prizing maybe a more expensive cheese or a grass-fed cow, and we're willing to pay the higher price tag. Obviously, it's a luxury, and unfortunately, it's so socioeconomic. But if you could teach children or our youth some simple things, like, and I do this in nutrition programs with Boys and Girls Club, can we drink water when we're thirsty? Like something so simple, instead of drinking, you know, iced tea, Arizona iced tea. And they know that soda is bad, but there's so many drinks on the market that are, you know, proclaimed as good or healthy or electrolyte or sports, you know, enhanced, but let's drink water. And I was just, you know, we were just in Mexico, and everywhere you go, the first thing they ask you is, what would you like to drink? And they don't feel that water's safe. So obviously, they're not going to spend their money on a bottled water. They're going to drink a beverage that's a little bit more bang for their buck, right? So you look at that and you say, oh, wow, what a coincidence. Mexico has the highest rate of obesity in the world. But I'm hoping with the glamour of restaurants and chefs and cooking programs, there's now a cooking program in every gym. And I think they're more watched and they're more mainstream, that people will actually start prizing cooking at home again, or at least prizing restaurants that make food from scratch. It's my hope.
But there is, I think, we were talking about this earlier, that people see food as a hobby, like flower arranging or DIY or something. But food is our one shared universal experience. You can be celibate, you can dodge taxes. Everyone has to eat. This is a truism, obviously. But everyone has to eat. You might live to eat or eat to live. Some people aren't interested in food, and it's just fuel. But food is not just this hobby. Food is the reason why we move from hunter-gatherers to sedentary farmers. Now, the fact of moving from having to hunter-gather to move around and spend all your calories, whopping buffalo or whatever it was over the head and dragging them home and cooking them. The moment we got to sedentary farming, that allowed us to sort of write things and start making music and art. So you could say that movement of hunter-gatherer to sedentary was the beginning of art as we know it. Of course, there were the cave paintings. But you can see more, for example, of the history of, you go to Sicily and you look at Caponata or something, you can see on your plate the history of the Moors coming. You can see these culinary footprints through what you eat on the table, which is, much more interesting than some dusty old guidebook. You're seeing history on the plate, and I find that fascinating. You can see the history of invasion. You can see, there's anthropology, there's sociology. Food is everything, and more scientists are beginning to understand how important the gut is with all these nerve endings. The brain they're beginning to understand, but they know nothing about the gut. And this is the new forefront of scientific research, is how important nutrition is to behavior, to health, happiness, wealth, well-being. You look at prisons and schools, and the UK, the National Health, which is a fantastic thing. But you come out from a triple bypass operation and you get some horrible fried bit of rubbish. It makes no sense. There's no linking up of why is obesity going up? Why is type 2 diabetes going up? There's no bringing it all together to realize that to eat a balanced and healthy diet doesn't mean to say you have to be vegan or wag your finger and not drink and not eat burgers, but balance and understanding about balancing all the different kinds of foods. You have to be pragmatic and I think we should join up much more. Health and eating and behavior is so important. My kids, if they go and eat sweets, they're going to be running around like nutters all day and then crash down. Whereas, if you can just sort of like porridge if they're going off running, it's just basic things. And I'm always amazed that our government full stop, just sort of sees food as, it's just, here's the budget, here's 20p per patient at school, and they don't think enough about it. And I'm hoping that a good government is starting to put everything together to think that a well-fed nation is a healthy nation. And again, I have no faith in our government, so it won't happen for a while. But there we go, we can but hope.
Oh God. And I guess speaking of kind of nationalism or kind of seeing the world through food, you explain where fish and chips came about in one of your books, and I love that. Will you tell the audience, because I think the history of food is fascinating, and especially, kind of the UK where it's at right now with Brexit and this kind of very traditional dish that is British of fish and chips. So you
get these idiots who, Brexit is a disaster, but anyway, there we go. Why we want to leave Europe, I never know, but that's a whole different thing. And it split our family apart, it split friends apart. It's in the UK, this Brexit thing is a huge thing. Anyway, that's a whole different topic. But fish and chips, you get all these nationalists waving their flags, probably on the more hard right end of the spectrum, English, Britain for the British and all that sort of thing, whatever that means. But fish and chips, they say, oh, it's as English as fish and chips. Now, fried fish was brought in with the Jewish immigrants around about the 17th, 18th centuries. They used to come in and sell it on the streets. This is I suppose, more Ashkenazi, but, cold fish sold on the streets when London had a great street food culture. And chips are French. so this great British meal is a Jewish-French hybrid, which is brilliant, which I think is, and it's things like that, all food, fusion. When you think of the Columbian Exchange, a great Columbian Exchange where, obviously, when they came over to 1492 and beyond, all the New World and Old World, so tomatoes came over and all the sort of nightshade family and then cattle and all the rest. This was a great fusion. So fusion, food is always. There's always fusion. There's always an exchange. It's always evolving food. So this idea of culinary nationalism that this is British and therefore not foreign mark. It's never black and white. It's just endless shades of grey, which makes it fascinating, I think.
And I would just say I'm going to ask one quick question of you both, and then maybe we'll open it up to people if they want to ask questions. Okay, favorite meal. I'll say of the past. I'm not going to say I'm not going to say forever, but I would say this year. How about that? Can we, or do you want to do forever?
No, not forever.
Okay, this year.
I can't even think of my favourite meal of the last 24 hours. It's that, because it's been nice,
Okay.
If that's the thing, is that you think, well, we were in the mood for steak last night, and we had steak, and it was perfect. But then you go to
Lions.
Well, Lions last night, that was amazing. But then you think, I went to Chengdu a couple of months ago in China, and there was some tripe hot pot there was made, but it just changes every second of every day. I'm thinking, that was the best. Was that the best? So whether it could be Le Gavroche, and it could be a taco carnitas stand in Mexico City. I can never make up my mind.
There's this terrible website that has every prisoner's last meal.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I love that.
And I
plate.
used to be a little obsessed with it, but I always wonder what would my last meal be.
That's a good question.
Caviar.
There you go. Wrote it down. Gosh, what's so good? There's so many great dishes here in the desert. So maybe I'll stick desert. I would do a combination of the chile hueritos at El Mexicali restaurant on Indio Boulevard in Indio, which you should hit up before you go.
Done.
Johannes Wiener Schnitzel. I went to Fisher's in London, and this Wiener Schnitzel is better.
Is it?
Mm-hmm. I'll stand by that,
Okay.
mano a mano. I think our beef Wellington is very good at Mr. Lyons. I don't know if you've had that. We have a bacon flight at Cheeky's.
A bacon flight, genius.
We have Hadley's Date Shakes. There's a lot of really good things here. And the cheeseburger at Tyler's restaurant in Palm Springs, one of the best.
Okay.
I'm going to stay with that.
Sounds
Is there something
delicious.
else that we're missing? You guys, they eat with me all the time. I don't know.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I'll start here.
Elizabeth, where would you go for oxtails?
Oh, me?
Tara,
Yeah, they
yes.
think I would go to Mr. Lyons. We're doing it, and I'm not trying to pitch our restaurant, but we do a roasted bone marrow with roasted oxtail jam on top. Just launched that.
Is that your mother's recipe?
It's not. Hers is actually better. But so my mom's Chinese, so before she even started cooking, she would chop up garlic and onions. I mean, it was like, and some ginger. It went in every single pot, even before she went to the market to get food. But so she does it with soy and.
Tom, question for you and then for Tara. Tom's very, very quick. I'm a big fan of gristle, and I would wonder where you would recommend it.
Mom,
Okay, now for the
no,
real
no, no.
For your corn pancakes, where did you conceptualize that?
It's my mom. We always had corn pancakes. My nephew, who lives in Paris, they were just telling me literally 2 days ago that every time he goes to a restaurant, he's 8 years old, he says, can you just put corn in them? And they're like, corn and pancakes. My mom used to call them Iowa pancakes. I don't know if that was just her name, but. And we put our fresh roasted corn in our pancakes, just,
And the quick one is, why are the restaurants not including, and I'm talking even the very high-end restaurants, you're not seeing a lot of the grass-fed beef, and it's so important.
We have so our burger at Cheeky's is grass-fed, and we have a grass-fed filet at the steakhouse. And then we use a grass-fed beef in our meatballs at Birba. The problem is that grass-fed beef doesn't taste very good. I think when people want a steak, they want a nice corn-fed fatty steak, and you know, for the few. I know if he went and we gave him a grass-fed beef.
No, I love grass-fed because we only have grass-fed in the UK,
Uh-huh.
but you can get amazing flavour from grass-fed. I think
We can.
it's just a different flavour profile from the buttery,
Yep.
grain-fed stuff. Because sometimes in the UK, sometimes you crave an American grain-fed. I know it's bad. I know it's fast food nation, and you know it's not good for the environment. But there is something about that grain-fed that you occasionally crave. It's tender. It's buttery.
It's his
much
fault.
more chewy and minerally grass-fed. But we all grew up on grass-fed, so for us it's a luxury to go and have this thing that is not environmentally very friendly.
You look at the bistecca fiorentina, the, you know, best steak in the world, and those cows are all grass-fed. So, so I think it's the corn-fed nation that craves that fatty beef, unfortunately.
Well, I was wondering, in your biography, it says you attribute your mother's cooking to how you developed your love of, what were your mother's specialties? Did she herself cook?
She did indeed cook herself. She brought up my sister and I, you know, cooking herself. It was. We talk about the importance of mother, and we talk about the emotional links you have, ties you have to food, and you know, the person who gives you from obviously the very first moment is that link you have with your mother and food is very strong. And you talk about your mother. Oh, it was English roast chicken. Always bloody roast chicken. English things, you know, Dover sole. Again, you say, how do you cook that? What's your recipe? Shepherd's pie. She says, well, you just cook it. There was no such thing as a recipe because she was cooking for children. You know, it's quite boring cooking for children all the day.
These recipes were handed down from her family?
Not really. No, I think she just, you know, she had to feed two hungry children. I think my grandparents had cooks, to be honest. But my mother would cook, and yeah, whatever was there. I think to read too much into her thinking, right, this is an old family recipe. I wish we had recipes going back 200 years, but it was more like get a chicken from the butcher, or get a steak, or get a bit of salmon, or get a bit of fish, or sausages, or whatever it was, and just do it. And that way that mothers who are natural cooks, some mothers can't cook at all, but it's just a way, you know, coming home still when I go home to her house with my sister, we still... He is now, since my stepmother died a few years ago, so he had to look after himself. We have a thing called an Aga in the UK, which is like a range, you know, with those hot stones. And they're pretty difficult because they only have either hot or very hot. You know, it's not much, there's no control like a gas. But he would cook steaks, he'd put it into a toast rack and cook it straight on the, you know, which is delicious, like a hot stone, but it would slightly bugger up the Aga with this big layer of smoky fat for the next 5 days. But he's a good cook now, yeah. She cooks scrambled eggs at Christmas.
All right, we've got room. I'm so sorry. We've got room for two more quick questions. Okay, great.
I think the hamburger in the bar room at Mr. Lyons is one of the best in the...
Thank you.
But I have a question. Quantity versus quality. It seems to have changed a great deal.
Thank goodness, yeah. I mean, there's nothing better than seeing a plate come back and not have to give someone a to-go box. I don't know how America got to this level. I know, it's like, it takes your appetite away, doesn't it, almost? Have you seen some of the portions?
The portions are quite big,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
No.
When I lived in Nashville, there was obesity-friendly seats at the hospital, which I thought were love seats.
Yeah.
Just saying. Yeah.
I have indeed, I've seen The Trip, yeah. Nowadays, there used to be awful country house hotels, country restaurants. There are a few people sort of, Francis Coulson at Sharrow Bay and Joyce Molyneux down at the Carved Angel. But now, yes, all over the country, there's this movement of high-end chefs, whether it's Simon Rogan or Sat Baines or Heston and you can, all those. That's not. They're still very expensive restaurants, you know. And they're tasting menus. Again, we could get into a chat about the tyranny of the tasting menu. Do you really want to sit for 5 hours and be lectured the whole way through? You've ordered something, they tell you what it is. The conversation doesn't flow at all, and it annoys me. But yes, there are lots of those restaurants now, and that's why as a restaurant critic writing a weekly column, it's easy. You can go from the $10 Thai, really pokey, lovely, stinky Thai, all the way up to Le Manoir or whatever Rogan's place is called. Yeah, there's lots of places. And there's this movement at the high end. Again, it's not the food revolution, but at the high end, there's 30, 40 restaurants across Britain now that are world class, if you like that sort of food, which I sometimes do.
We've got 45 seconds. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah?
So on the theme of waste, can you, each of you, comment on your thoughts? It frustrates me to go to a restaurant when there's things on the dish that aren't described in the description, and then I don't like it or I don't want it, so I don't eat it. As a restaurateur or a critic, am I off base, or do you think that restaurants should tell what's in the menu item accurately?
Often there's not enough time, not enough space in the menu. I don't think orange slices belong on the side of a plate if you're...
No, but like if you put like a cucumber on something and it's not in the description, I don't want to eat that.
I think you're not off base. Especially with allergies, you have to be really careful. Especially, if there's something that's neutral, I think... Sure. I don't think something should be on the plate that doesn't belong on the dish and doesn't make the food taste better. A garnish should always make a food taste better.
Yeah, garnish. Garnish for garnish's sake is a waste of time. You don't want something you can't eat or don't want. But then again, if you have something like coq au vin or dan dan noodles, there are going to, there are going to be variations on the classics. But I agree, if you don't like something and it appears, I hate goat's cheese, that appears on a plate and it's not there, I'm not going to eat it.
All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank
you
you.
very much.